So welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and I'm sitting down with our resident expert today to unpack something massive, honestly.
Hi there. Yeah, massive is definitely the right word for this one.
And for you listening at home, we are jumping into a topic that you absolutely know. I mean, you've probably studied it in high school.
Right.
You've seen the movie adaptations, or at the very least, you quote this material in your everyday life without even realizing it.
Oh, absolutely. It's just baked into the English language at this point.
It really is. We are doing a deep dive into William Shakespeare.
The bard himself.
Exactly. But we aren't just here to recite poetry or talk about the plays in a vacuum. We've got a specific biography transcript as our source material today.
And it is a fascinating source because it doesn't just treat him as a writer.
Right. It treats him as a historical figure.
A colossal figure in history. That's actually how the source frames it right from the jump.
Yeah, and it throws some incredibly heavy titles at us right away. It calls him the greatest writer in the English language.
Which is quite a claim to carry.
It is. And it goes on. The world's pre-eminent dramatist, England's national poet.
And the Bard of Avon.
The Bard of Avon, right? So you hear these titles and you think, okay, this guy's life must be the most documented, well-recorded history ever.
You would think that.
But the premise of our deep dive today, the real mission here, is to look at the gaps. Because as our source points out, his life is full of these surprising black holes.
It's the ultimate paradox. You have the most famous writer in history, and yet he's almost a ghost in his own biography.
A ghost. I like that. So our goal for you today is to move beyond the plays you had to read in school and try to understand the actual man.
The man behind the titles.
Exactly. Yeah. The man who got absolutely trashed by his critics early on.
The rubbish review.
We will definitely get to the rubbish review, but let's start at the very beginning. Let's look at the origins of the Bard in Stratford.
Right, so the source gives us some very firm dates to anchor us.
It says he was born April 23.
1564.
In Stratford-upon-Avon, which is in Warwickshire, England.
And then immediately after that birth date, the source gives us a baptism date of April 26, 1564.
Which is just 3 days later.
Exactly.
And I think for a modern listener, you hear 3 days and it's like, well, yeah, they had a busy weekend. They got to the church when they could.
Right, but in that era, a 3-day turnaround is practically immediate. It shows a real urgency.
Because of the infant mortality rates?
Precisely. Life was incredibly fragile. You didn't wait around to celebrate a birth. You secured the spiritual and the civic record of that child as fast as humanly possible.
So that April 26th baptism is really the anchor for his existence in the historical record.
It's the proof he was there.
Now let's talk about the family he was born into, because there's this romantic idea that all great artists have to starve in the streets to get their genius.
Tortured artist trope.
Right. But the source paints a very different picture of his parents. His father, John Shakespeare.
The text specifically describes John as a successful local businessman.
A successful businessman, not a peasant.
No, not at all. And then you look at his mother, Mary Arden.
The daughter of a landowner.
Right. So think about the social standing that implies.
It's a power couple in a small town.
It really is. You have commerce on the father's side, and you have landed stability on the mother's side.
So he's not born into absolute poverty, but he's not royalty either.
He's solidly middle class for that era. He's comfortable.
And the source notes he was the third son.
Which is an interesting dynamic on its own.
Why is that?
The first son usually inherits the bulk of the estate or the primary business. The third son has a little more freedom or pressure, depending on how you look at it, to go out and make his own way.
He has to carve his own path, but he has a safety net.
Exactly. And that safety net includes access to things like education.
Okay, let's pause there, because education is one of the big mysteries in the source.
It really is a frustrating gap for historians.
The source explicitly says little is known of Shakespeare's childhood and education.
We have no report cards, no attendance sheets.
Nothing. But the source does offer some very educated speculation. It says he likely attended the King's New School in Stratford.
Which makes perfect sense given his father's status. A successful businessman's son would go to the local grammar school.
But grammar school back then isn't like grammar school today, right? They weren't just learning to share and color inside the lines.
Oh no. The source tells us exactly what the curriculum focused on. Reading, writing, and, this is the key phrase, intensive grammar based on Latin classical authors.
Intensive grammar based on Latin classical authors?
Yes.
So what does that actually do to a kid's brain? I mean, for you listening, imagine being 10 years old and your entire day is just translating Latin.
It completely wires your brain for language. When you study Ovid and Virgil and Cicero, you aren't just casually reading stories.
You're breaking them down.
You're reverse engineering the language. You're learning rhetoric. You're learning how a sentence can be structured to persuade someone or to break their heart.
So even though we don't have the physical school records, the source is basically telling us this is the forge where his genius was made.
Absolutely. You don't become the preeminent dramatist of the world by accident. That rigorous Latin foundation gave him the toolkit he needed.
He learned the rules so well that he could eventually break them.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we have this young guy, solid family, great education, and then we get into his personal life and things move very fast.
Very fast.
The source takes us to 1582. He marries Anne Hathaway.
Right.
And the age gap here is something we have to talk about because the source highlights it. He was 18.
And she was 26.
She was 8 years older than him.
Which is significant.
I mean, even today, if an 18-year-old high school senior marries a 26-year-old professional, people are going to talk.
Oh, definitely. And in the Elizabethan era, it was just as unusual, if not more so. Typically, men waited to marry until they had finished an apprenticeship and established themselves in a trade.
So to marry at 18...
It implies a certain level of urgency.
Urgency, okay. And when we look at the timeline of the children, that urgency makes a lot of sense.
It does. They didn't waste any time.
The source tells us they had 3 children, and I want to look closely at the names it provides.
Susanna Hall.
Right, the eldest. And then Judith Queenie.
And the son.
The son. The source very specifically names the son Hamlet Shakespeare.
Hamlet.
Now, normally you hear historians call him Hamnet with an N, but our source text is explicit. It says Hamlet.
And we have to analyze what's in front of us. If we take the source at its word that he named his son Hamlet, that is incredible.
It's insane foreshadowing.
It really is. It creates this direct bridge between his private domestic life in Stratford and his future public life in London.
Because later on the source lists Hamlet as one of his best works.
His arguably most famous tragic play.
Right. So for you listening, imagine the emotional weight of writing a tragedy about death and madness and naming the lead character after your own son.
You can't separate the art from the man in that instance.
Yeah.
It feels deeply personal.
So he's got this young family. He's an 18-year-old dad. He's got a wife who is significantly older. He's living in Stratford.
And then he vanishes.
Completely vanishes. The source calls this period from 1585 to 1592 Shakespeare's lost years.
7 entire years.
It is a massive gap in the record. We know he had kids in the early 80s, and we know he's working in London by 1592.
But the space in between is just a void.
So what happens during a historical figure's lost years? I mean, you don't just sit in a room for 7 years and then emerge as the greatest writer alive.
No, you certainly don't. And that's the great speculation that the source points to by calling them lost. He was doing something to bridge the gap between being a small-town father and a London playwright.
Was he traveling? Was he a school teacher?
Working as a law clerk. Joining a traveling theater troupe. The source doesn't say because the records don't exist.
It's literally a black box, but whatever happened in that black box, it worked.
It transformed him.
Because when we get to 1592, the lost years are over. The source says there are records of performances showing his plays on the London stage.
He has officially arrived in the theater scene.
But his arrival wasn't exactly greeted with open arms.
No, it was actually quite brutal.
This is honestly my favorite detail in the entire source transcript. In 1592, another playwright looks at Shakespeare's writing and calls it rubbish.
Rubbish.
Yeah.
Such a dismissive word.
It's not constructive criticism. It's not like, hey, kid, your pacing is a little off. It's just straight up, this is garbage.
And it came from a peer. Another playwright, as the source calls him. Someone established in the industry looking down on this newcomer.
It's the Elizabethan equivalent of getting ratioed on social media, just totally publicly dunked on.
It humanizes him so much.
Yeah.
We think of Shakespeare as this untouchable god of literature, but he started out getting hate mail.
He was an outsider trying to break into a very elite club.
And the establishment pushed back.
But the irony, and the source makes sure to point this out, the irony is that the same playwright who insulted him and called his work rubbish afterwards documented his biography.
You can't write a better plot twist than that.
The ultimate, I told you so. The guy who hated you ended up having to write down your life story because you became so famous.
It just shows the undeniable force of Shakespeare's talent. You might hate him when he shows up. You might think he's an uneducated upstart from Stratford.
But eventually you have to bow to the work.
You have to document him because he becomes the center of the cultural universe.
So he survives the bad reviews, he keeps pushing, and the source tells us that by 1594, his plays were solely performed by the Lord Chamberlain's company.
Right, an exclusive arrangement.
But it adds a very specific detail here. It says he wasn't just the writer for the company, he was one of the actors.
That is a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Why is that so important? I mean, plenty of people just write scripts.
Because it means he was deeply embedded in the actual physical production of the art. He wasn't sitting in an ivory tower sending pages down to the peasants.
He was on the stage sweating with them.
Exactly. He had skin in the game. He knew what it felt like to stand in front of a live audience. He knew what kind of lines got a laugh and what kind of lines put people to sleep.
So being an actor was almost like real-time market research for his writing.
That's a perfect analogy. If a monologue was too long and the crowd got restless, he felt that energy directly. So the next time he wrote a monologue, he made it tighter.
It makes the writing practical, not just theoretical.
And it meant his livelihood was entirely tied to the company's success, both as a writer and a performer.
And speaking of success, things are about to get kicked up to a whole new level.
A royal level.
Right. So the source walks us through a major political shift. Queen Elizabeth dies.
The end of an era.
And King James I takes the throne.
Now, whenever the monarchy changes, there is massive anxiety, especially for artists.
Yeah, because the new boss might hate theater.
Exactly. King James could have just shut the whole operation down.
But he didn't. Instead, the source says King James issued a royal patent to the company.
A royal patent is essentially the ultimate endorsement.
And they get a rebrand. Lord Chamberlain's company becomes the King's Men.
The King's Men. Just let that sink in for a second.
It's incredible branding.
You aren't just a group of actors anymore. You are the personal entertainment for the sovereign. The king himself is your patron.
That elevates the stakes from just trying to sell tickets to a commercial crowd to literally representing the crown.
It's massive job security, but it's also intense pressure. You cannot afford to put on a bad show when you are the King's Men.
Well, whatever they were doing, it was working because the fame just explodes from here.
It's a rapid ascent.
The source notes that by 1598, his name started appearing on the title pages of the plays.
Which was incredibly rare at the time. Plays were considered cheap entertainment. People didn't usually care who wrote them.
So putting his name on the cover means his name actually sold copies.
He'd become a franchise.
Yeah.
People weren't just going to see a play. They were going to see the new Shakespeare.
And then we hit 1599. And the source uses a really fascinating phrase here. It says, Shakespeare's wharf were famous all over the globe.
Shakespeare's wharf.
Now I'm going to look at that phrase closely. Wharf, like a dock, a shipping port.
It's a very evocative word choice from the source.
What do you think it means in this context? Because he didn't literally own a shipping dock, right?
I think we have to interpret it metaphorically. A wharf is a hub of commerce. It's where goods are loaded up and shipped out to the rest of the world.
Okay, I see that. So his writing is the cargo.
Exactly. His ideas, his characters, his plays are the goods being exported from this cultural wharf.
And it says they were famous all over the globe.
Which implies a reach that goes way beyond London. His influence was crossing borders.
Think about the timeline here. 1592, he is called rubbish.
Right.
1599, his metaphorical wharf is famous all over the globe. That is just 7 years.
7 years to go from the bottom of the pile to total global dominance.
Yeah.
It's an unprecedented rise.
So what was he actually shipping from this wharf? What was the output?
The source gives us the raw statistics, and they are frankly staggering.
It says he had an active writing period that continued until at least 1613.
That's decades of sustained output.
And the final count, 38 dramas, 154 sonnets, 2 long poems.
Just the sheer physical labor of writing that much text by hand with a quill is exhausting to think about.
Let alone writing masterpieces. And the source lists what it considers the best works.
The heavy hitters.
It specifically names Hamlet, Othello, Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar, and Macbeth.
That is an unbelievable run of genius.
And it's so diverse. You've got teen romance with Romeo and Juliet. You've got a political thriller with Julius Caesar.
Supernatural horror with Macbeth.
A psychological breakdown in Hamlet. He could do it all.
And the source attempts to explain how he did it. It calls his style extremely innovative.
But it doesn't just leave it there. It explains the mechanics of the innovation. It says he adapted traditional and convention styles, but added his own twist with metaphors and rhetorical phrases.
This is such a great point from the source. He wasn't inventing new genres from scratch.
He was a remixer.
Exactly. He took stories people already knew, old histories, Italian folk tales, traditional revenge plots, and he poured this high-octane language over them.
The metaphors and rhetorical phrases.
Right. He elevated standard plots into high art through the sheer power of his vocabulary.
But here is where the source drops a really interesting critique. And I did not expect this from a biography of Shakespeare.
Yeah, it was a very sharp observation.
It says regarding these additions, these beautiful metaphor, it says, quote, however, the additions hardly ever align to the plot or the characters of this story.
Hardly ever align.
That sounds like a flaw.
It absolutely is framed as a tension in his work.
So break that down for us. What does it mean that his language hardly ever aligned with the plot?
Well, think about an action movie where right in the middle of a car chase, the main character stops to give a 5-minute, beautiful poetic speech about the nature of the universe.
The audience would be like, shouldn't you be driving?
Exactly. The source is suggesting that Shakespeare's love for grand rhetoric and complex metaphors sometimes overpowered the simple logic of the story.
So the poetry was almost too big for the characters.
Right. He would give a relatively simple character the most profoundly complex philosophical language. It didn't strictly align with who they were or what the plot needed them to do in that exact moment.
He was prioritizing the beauty of the words over the strict momentum of the narrative.
Yes. The style became the substance. And honestly, while the source points it out as a contradiction, it's probably why we still read him today.
Because we don't remember the exact plot logistics of Hamlet, but we all remember to be or not to be.
Exactly. The misaligned rhetoric is the part that survived.
Okay, so we've tracked his rise, we've looked at the massive output and the style, and now we have to talk about the end of the era.
The final act.
The source brings us back to where it all started. His hometown, Stratford.
He retires back to the country. A wealthy, successful man.
And we get the date of his death, April 23, 1616.
Which is incredibly poetic if you remember his birth date.
Born April 23, died April 23. He died exactly on his 52nd birthday.
52.
Now, to us, 52 feels entirely too young.
It was a respectable age for the 17th century.
Yeah.
But he certainly wasn't an elderly man. He was firmly middle-aged.
And the circumstances of his death introduce one final massive mystery from our source.
The situation with the will.
Right. So the source states that he signed his will describing himself as being in perfect health.
Perfect health. That is the exact phrasing documented.
And then the twist, he died within a month of signing that document.
It's jarring. It really is.
How do you go from putting it in writing that you are in perfect health to being dead in less than 30 days at age 52?
That is the question that historians have debated forever. And the source just lays the contradiction out there for us.
Because it implies something sudden.
Very sudden. It wasn't a long, slow decline from old age. To declare perfect health and then vanish implies a catastrophic event. A sudden fever, a stroke, something immediate.
It almost feels suspicious, or at least deeply unresolved.
It leaves a shadow over the end of his story. It's an abrupt cut to black.
And then there's the inheritance. The source tells us he left the bulk of his large estate to his elder daughter, Susanna.
Susanna Hall, the firstborn.
So she basically gets the empire.
She inherits the wealth and the stability that he spent his entire life building. From the lost years to the king's men, it all funnels down to her.
And the source leaves us with one final thought, a quote attributed to him.
And it's a perfect thematic wrap-up.
It says, all that glitters is not gold.
All that glitters is not gold.
What does that quote mean to you in the context of everything we just talked about today?
Well, look at the surface of his life. Look at the glitter. The royal patents, the global fame of his wharf, the titles like national poet.
It looks incredibly shiny from the outside.
But underneath the glitter, it was a life of struggle and contradiction.
Right. Getting called rubbish by his peers.
The mysterious lost years where he had to completely reinvent himself. The tension between his artistic style and his plots.
And then dropping dead at 52 right after saying he was fine.
Exactly. The quote reminds us that a glossy reputation hides a very complicated, very human reality. The fame was gold, but the life itself was messy.
Don't just look at the monument, look at the cracks in the marble.
I love that, yes.
So for you listening, let's just recap the journey we've been on. We started with a middle-class kid in Stratford learning Latin.
We saw him marry an older woman at 18 and name his son Hamlet.
He disappeared for 7 whole years, arrived in London just to get hated on by the establishment.
But he pushed through. He acted, he wrote, and he secured the king's royal favor.
He shipped 38 dramas and over 150 sonnets out to the globe. And he did it all while wrestling with a style that was sometimes too big for its own good.
And then he died suddenly on his birthday, leaving us with more questions than answers.
It is truly a colossal life. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a provocative thought, something to really mull over.
Let's hear it.
I keep going back to those lost years, 1585 to 1592.
The 7-year void.
We know who he was before them, and we know what he became after them, but what actually happened in the dark?
Right.
What unrecorded conversations, what silent failures or hidden adventures turned a small-town dad into the mind that could write Macbeth?
That is the ultimate blank page in the greatest writer's life.
Maybe the most important parts of our lives are the ones that never make it into the historical record.
A great point to end on.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive today.
It was my absolute pleasure.
And for everyone listening, keep looking beneath the glitter. We will catch you on the next one.
Take care.